There is a name sitting quietly in a family tree somewhere, Roman in shape, Roman in sound, and for centuries, no one questioned what it meant. It looked like heritage. It looked like proof. Then geneticists started asking a different question. Does the name match the blood? For generations, a surname was treated as a kind of certificate. If it echoed Latin, if it carried the rhythm of the Old Republic or the weight of an imperial title, families assumed it meant descent, a straight, unbroken thread reaching back 2,000 years to the founders of Rome. The story felt complete. Almost too neat. That was the problem. Across Italy, Spain, France, Britain, and the old provinces the empire once swallowed whole, thousands of families carry surnames that sound unmistakably Roman, names built from Latin roots, from military ranks, from the vocabulary of conquest itself. And for a long time, the explanation was simple. These names survived because the ancestry survived. Rome didn't just leave roads and ruins. It left descendants, and those descendants kept the names. It was a tidy story. It matched what people wanted to believe, that identity could be inherited cleanly, like a coin passed hand to hand without ever losing its shape. Historians accepted it. Genealogists built entire family narratives on it. And for a while, nothing challenged it because nothing could. Then came the genome. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand what a surname actually is and what it isn't. A name is cultural. It's legal. It's passed down through custom, through language, through the decisions of clerks and priests recording births in a register centuries ago. A name does not require a drop of the blood it claims. It requires only continuity of naming, not continuity of ancestry. DNA does not care about paperwork. The first cracks appeared in an unlikely place, not in ancient graves, but in modern databases. As population geneticists began mapping the genetic structure of Europe in detail, comparing Y chromosome lineages, which pass largely unchanged from father to son, against the surnames those same men carried, they expected a rough correlation. Names transmitted through the paternal line should, in theory, echo the transmission of paternal DNA. Same pathway, same direction. It seemed logical. What they found instead was messier than expected. Some men bearing deeply Roman-sounding surnames carried Y chromosome signatures common across Iron Age Europe, long before Rome existed as anything more than a cluster of hilltop settlements. Others carried lineages that pointed toward the Eastern Mediterranean, toward Anatolia, toward populations that entered Roman territory not as conquerors but as slaves, merchants, soldiers levied from distant provinces, or freedmen who took the names of the households that once owned them. That detail alone should stop you, because in the Roman world, a name was not always a birthright. It was quite often a legal event. When an enslaved person was freed, they frequently took the family name of their former master, the person who had held their fate in his hands. A soldier granted citizenship after decades of service in a foreign legion might adopt a fully Roman name upon discharge, discarding whatever name his own family had used for generations. An entire lineage in Gaul or Iberia or North Africa could become Roman on paper within a single lifetime, while their ancestry remained exactly what it had always been, local, regional, utterly unconnected to the city of Rome itself. This is where the story stops being simple. If you enjoy this kind of science-driven history, where the evidence complicates the story instead of confirming it, consider subscribing, because there is far more hidden in the human past than most surnames will ever admit. Researchers working with autosomal DNA, the broader genetic material inherited from both parents, not just the paternal line, began comparing modern individuals with Roman-derived surnames against ancient DNA extracted from burial sites across the former empire. Autosomal data tells a richer story than the Y chromosome alone. It carries fragments from every branch of the family tree, diluted generation by generation, but never fully erased. It is, in a sense, a more honest witness. And the witness testified to something unexpected. Many individuals carrying old Roman surnames showed autosomal ancestry that was overwhelmingly local, shaped far more by the population that lived in a given region before, during, and after Roman rule than by any specific Roman genetic signal, if such a signal could even be meaningfully defined. A family in southern Spain with a name derived from a Roman military title looked, genetically, almost identical to their non-Roman named neighbors. The name had traveled. The ancestry, largely, had stayed home. That was not a contradiction. It was a signal. Because what it suggested was something. Historians had argued for decades without hard genetic confirmation. Rome was never a bloodline spreading outward from a single city. It was an administrative and cultural system that absorbed populations faster than it replaced them. Rome did not primarily export Romans. It converted people, linguistically, legally, culturally, into Romans, while their genetic ancestry remained rooted in the soil their families had occupied for thousands of years before the first Roman magistrate ever arrived. The empire did not overwrite the map. It relabeled it. At this point, 3 explanations began competing for attention, and no single one fully accounted for the pattern on its own. The first was cultural adoption without genetic replacement. The idea that Roman identity spread primarily as a legal and linguistic status, distributed through citizenship grants, military service, and freed slave naming customs, largely independent of any large-scale movement of Roman bloodlines into the provinces. The second was selective elite migration, a smaller, but real, movement of Roman administrators, colonists, and veteran soldiers who did settle permanently in conquered territories, intermarried with local populations, and left a genuine but diluted genetic signature, one visible in some regions and nearly invisible in others depending on how intensely a province was colonized. The third was multidirectional admixture across the empire itself, the movement of people not just from Rome outward, but between provinces, as soldiers from North Africa were stationed in Britain, as merchants from Syria settled in Gaul, as enslaved individuals from one corner of the empire were relocated to another. Under this model, Roman ancestry was never a single stream at all. It was hundreds of streams, converging and separating across 4 centuries of imperial movement. None of these explanations was wrong. The evidence increasingly suggested all 3 were operating simultaneously, in different proportions, in different provinces, at different moments in the empire's long life. The landmark shift came when researchers gained access to larger ancient DNA panels, genetic material recovered directly from burial sites in and around Rome itself, spanning the earliest Iron Age settlements through the height of imperial power and into the empire's slow unraveling. This was different from modern comparative data. This was Rome's population speaking for itself, layer by layer, century by century. And the picture that emerged was almost the opposite of what the old story predicted. Rome, even at its founding, was not genetically uniform. Long before the legions marched anywhere, the city sat at a crossroads of Mediterranean movement, absorbing people from the Italian peninsula, from the eastern Mediterranean, from North Africa. By the height of the empire, ancient genomes recovered from Roman-era burials showed an extraordinary range of ancestry, individuals with genetic profiles matching populations from the Levant, from the Aegean, from deep within the empire's eastern provinces, buried within the city itself, sometimes within the same cemeteries as those carrying more locally rooted Italian ancestry. Rome was never one bloodline pretending to be an empire. Rome was already an empire, genetically, before it finished conquering anyone. That is the twist that reframes everything. Because it means the old assumption that a Roman surname points backward toward a genetically pure Roman ancestor from the city itself was never really coherent to begin with. Rome's own population at its imperial peak was already a convergence zone, a place where distant ancestries met and mixed centuries before those names were ever exported outward to Hispania, Gaul, Britannia, or North Africa. Not a single thread running from Rome outward. A knot, tightening and loosening, again and again, across 400 years. The surnames survived the empire. In many cases, the ancestry it implies did not survive in any single coherent form at all, because it was never singular to begin with. This is bigger than genealogy. What the genetic evidence suggests, cautiously and without overstating its certainty, is that identity, the kind stamped into a family name, was never a reliable proxy for ancestry, not in the Roman world and arguably not in most complex, mobile human societies. Names carry legal history. Names carry cultural allegiance. Names carry the memory of a moment when someone, somewhere, chose to align themselves, or was forced to align themselves, with a particular power structure. They do not carry a clean genetic signature, and expecting them to may be one of the deepest misunderstandings in how ordinary people think about their own heritage. Picture, for a moment, a hillside in what is now southern France, sometime in the 2nd century. A retired soldier walks a dry, olive-lined ridge above a river valley, the kind of terrain that has not changed its bones in 2,000 years. Pale limestone, terraced slopes, the smell of dust and time carried on a wind that still moves the same way it did then. He was born somewhere in Gaul, to a family that spoke a language Rome never fully erased. He served 25 years in a legion that took him from Britain to the Danube. Upon discharge, he received citizenship, a plot of land, and a name, a fully Roman name, granted, not inherited. He marries locally. His children grow up bilingual, then, within a generation, monolingual in Latin. His grandchildren know only the Roman name. They do not know, and have no way of knowing, that the name is younger than the land they stand on, younger than the language their great-grandmother once spoke, younger than almost everything else in their inherited world except the empire itself. 2,000 years later, a descendant somewhere finds that name in a genealogy record and assumes it means Rome. It means something else. It means adaptation. It means survival through transformation, not through purity. That is not a smaller story than the one people expected. It is a larger one, because it suggests that human history, at every scale, resists the straight lines we try to draw through it. Populations do not move in single, clean waves. They braid together, separate, reabsorb, disappear from the written record and reappear in the genome centuries later, preserved not in any document, but in the quiet architecture of DNA itself, the one archive that does not require anyone to have written anything down. The old story treated a Roman surname as an ending, a fixed point of origin, a closed case. The genetic evidence treats it as a beginning of a much longer, much stranger question. Not simply where did this name come from, but through how many different peoples did it travel to reach you, and how much of what shaped you happened in the silences between the records. Scientists remain cautious about overstating any single finding here. Ancient DNA panels, however large, are still incomplete. Regional variation across the empire was significant, and conclusions that apply to Rome itself may not apply evenly to every province it once controlled. But the broader pattern, cultural and legal identity spreading further and faster than genetic ancestry, has held up across multiple independent lines of evidence, from Y chromosome studies to autosomal comparisons to direct ancient genome sequencing. If your family carries one of these old Roman names, the DNA is not asking you to abandon that inheritance. It is asking you to understand it differently, not as a bloodline stretching unbroken to a single ancient city, but as a mark left by one of the most complex human systems ever built, a system that absorbed identity faster than it ever spread blood. The empire is gone. The roads have crumbled or been paved over. The legions no longer march anywhere. But the names remain, carried forward by families who, in most cases, have no direct genetic connection to the city that gave those names their shape, and who are, in a much deeper and more interesting sense, exactly what Rome always was, a convergence of peoples, wearing one name, carrying many histories inside it. If stories like this interest you, where the evidence complicates the myth instead of confirming it, subscribe, because the map of human ancestry is still being redrawn, one buried genome at a time. The name was never the whole story. It was only ever the surface, and beneath it, the genome remembers what the record book forgot.